Imagine arriving at work and finding a fragile old woman collapsed in the hallway. Would you stop to help her, or just keep walking, pretending not to see? That was exactly the dilemma Mariama faced on that cloudy morning, when the weight of the world seemed to rest on her shoulders. A widow, alone, humiliated, and invisible to those who looked down on her humble life. Mariama spent her days scrubbing away the traces of other people's luxury without complaint. But that day, when she saw that old woman on the floor, she made a choice that would change everything. She dropped her bucket, forgot her own pain, and carried that stranger as if she were her greatest treasure. What Mariama could never have imagined was that this fragile old lady, now in her arms, held a secret that would transform her life forever. It was late afternoon when, after scrubbing the last hallway, Mariama noticed something different. On the floor, leaning against the cold wall, was a small elderly woman, her skin as thin as paper, trembling. The worn shawl covered part of her face, but the eyes, oh, the eyes seemed to search for a piece of the world where she could finally breathe in peace. Mariama looked around. No one. The building, always full of people who spoke loudly in the residents' group chat, was now silent before that scene. The old lady reached out her hand, but no words came out. Not a name, not even a sigh of explanation. In that instant, Mariama remembered her own father, who used to say, "Whoever closes the door to the afflicted, closes the door to God." Without thinking, she dropped the bucket, knelt down, and held the old woman's cold hand. She felt a weak pulse there, but full of a silent plea. "Come with me," she whispered, almost afraid to be heard by the world. She lifted the woman into her arms with a strength she didn't know still existed inside her. She walked down the empty hallways, feeling her heart beat like a drum in the dark night. When she reached the gate, the doorman widened his eyes. Mariama didn't explain anything. She walked past firmly, as if carrying a secret bigger than all the gossip. On the way, she heard a neighbor whisper from her balcony, "Look at that, poor thing. She was already struggling. Now she's getting herself into trouble." But Mariama didn't look back. She kept walking down the dusty street, holding that fragile life in her arms, like someone carrying a treasure invisible to the world. She knew she could be fired, that she might come back the next day and find the gate forever closed. She knew people's tongues were sharp as a knife for slicing cassava. She arrived home when the sky was already painted a dark gray. Her daughter, Aisa, ran to the door, startled. Mariama explained only with a look, that look that said, "Today, God knocked on our door." Aisa helped prepare the bed, pulled out a patched blanket, and they laid the woman down gently. The rice Mariama had set aside for dinner was split into 2 small plates. In that heavy silence, Mariama sat on the floor beside the bed. Her gaze drifted across the cracked wall, but her heart was fixed on the scene before her eyes. For the first time in years, someone prayed out loud in that house. And in that shy prayer, between the distant barking of a dog and the wind hitting the window, a new flame was born. There, in the midst of so many hidden pains, Mariama found something her employer's money could never buy, the dignity of helping without expecting anything in return. And while the rest of the neighborhood slept, busy talking about other people's lives, in that small house, a silent miracle began to bloom. Night arrived with a thin, biting cold, the kind that seeps into your bones and settles in your soul. The old oil lamp flickered in the corner of the room, casting shadows on the cracked walls, as if memories wanted to dance in the silence. Mary moved slowly, careful not to wake the old lady who slept with shallow breaths, as if each sigh was deciding whether to stay or leave this world. Aisa, the daughter, watched everything with wide eyes. It was as if, suddenly, the air in the house had changed. The girl stayed quiet, holding the leftover plate of rice, without the courage to ask anything. Mariama, sitting on the floor, adjusted the old lady's sheet with a gentleness she didn't even use on her own wounded knees. That night, there was no laughter, no radio music. There was only the sound of the wind trying to come in, the tired breathing of the old woman, and the soft beating of Mariama's heart, which seemed to repeat, "It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay." The old lady opened her eyes once, confused. She moved her dry lips, but no sound came out. Mariama held her hand, cold as a river stone, and squeezed it gently. Words weren't needed. In that touch, there was something the modern world has forgotten, the language of care without demands. the gesture of someone who doesn't measure a life's worth in coins or documents. After watching for a long time, Aisha came closer and asked, "Mum, does she have a family? Is she going to stay with us forever?" Mariama smiled, a fragile smile, and answered, "Daughter, today she is our family. Tomorrow, God will tell us." The girl didn't fully understand, but felt a warmth in her chest that didn't come from the stove. When it was time to sleep, Mariama pushed a thin rug to the corner, made it her bed, and covered herself with an almost transparent cloth. The bed, for the first time in many years, was left for someone other than her daughter. She knew that tomorrow her body would ache, her head would throb when she got up for work, but that night there was a different kind of peace. In the silence, the old woman murmured something that sounded like a prayer, a thread of a voice so faint it seemed to come from another time. Mariama closed her eyes and, in her mind, finished the prayer. There, on the hard floor, she felt a presence she hadn't felt since her husband's funeral, the certainty that, even in the mud, there is an invisible hand supporting those who choose to love without expecting anything in return. Aisha, lying in a corner, stayed awake watching her mother. In her eyes, the girl learned something no school ever teaches. A woman's greatness doesn't fit in a pretty dress or a full bank account. It fits in the courage to give up your bed to a stranger, to share the last handful of rice, and to quiet your own pain to soothe someone else's. The wall clock seemed to stand still. Time in that house became something else, a time of the soul, of memory, of longing that turns into compassion. Outside, crickets sang, cats rummaged through trash, and spiteful gossip already slept on the balconies. But inside, there was a silent sanctuary, an improvised altar where the sacrifice wasn't blood, but pure love. At one point, Mariama slowly got up, looked at the sleeping old woman, and whispered, "Thank you for coming into my life. I don't even know who you are, but I know that today I needed your presence more than you needed my help." She lay back down, pulled the cloth up to her chin, and closed her eyes. It wasn't a peaceful sleep, but it was a sleep full of truth. In the dark, she felt her heart beat steadily, as if praying without words, as if crying without tears. The night was long. Her body screamed for rest, but her soul seemed to stand watch, like a silent sentinel guarding a sacred secret. There, on the cold floor, Mariama became something more than a cleaning lady. She became a shelter, a living testimony that kindness does not die, even in the most forgotten alleys of the city. When the first rays of sun began to paint the wall, Mariama was already up. She ran her hand over her face, adjusted the scarf on her hair, and looked at the old woman breathing slowly. She went to her daughter, caressed her hair, and looked up at the ceiling as if talking to someone who lives up there. In that moment, a certainty blossomed in her chest. It may take time, it may hurt, but those who plant care always harvest blessings, and it was with this certainty that Mariama began her day, carrying in her body the pain of the years, but in her spirit, a courage that the whole world still hasn't managed to extinguish. The sun was still crawling along the horizon when Mariama left home. Her face seemed heavier than the old bucket she carried. Aisha stood in the doorway, holding her mother's torn apron, not knowing whether to smile or cry. Before leaving, Mariama cupped her daughter's face in her hands and simply said, "Trust." On the way, the world felt different. The houses breathed laziness. The streets kept hidden stories at every corner. Mariama walked with short steps, her head full of thoughts. The old lady's face still danced in her mind, that lost gaze, the trembling lips as if searching for an old embrace. When she arrived at the building, Mariama felt the air shift. The doorman, a thin man with small, venomous eyes, looked her up and down. He held his coffee mug like someone holding an invisible microphone. The security guards pretended to look at the floor, but their glances cut like a razor. Mariama took a deep breath, adjusted the scarf on her head, and passed through the gate without saying a word. The stairs seemed taller, the hallways longer. Each step echoed like a drum of judgment. When she reached the top floor, she saw the door to the big apartment open. A strange silence filled the space, as if something serious had just happened. She approached slowly. The air smelled of expensive perfume mixed with the shock of someone not ready for the truth. The housekeeper, a stern woman with a suspicious gaze, appeared in the doorway holding a cloth, as if it were a shield. "Have you seen Dona Odit?" the woman asked in a high-pitched voice, dripping with poison. Mariama felt her stomach freeze. "No, I don't know," she murmured. but the sentence died before it was fully born. The woman turned her back and shouted into the apartment, "She doesn't know anything. The lady is missing. What are we going to do now?" In that instant, the ground seemed to open beneath Mariama's feet. Her head spun, her knees shook. She imagined the fragile old woman lost somewhere, or worse, collapsed in some alley with no one to hold her. Her heart beat wildly, replaying every detail of the night before: the rice, the bed, the prayer, the silence full of secrets. As fear raced through her veins, she heard a voice from the hallway. "They say it was the cleaning lady who took the old woman. They say she kidnapped her to ask for money." The sentence hit her like a slap. Mariama turned round. The cleaning colleagues were whispering, holding buckets as if they were shields. One of them looked away, but the other held on to the gossip firmly, as if gripping a weapon. In her mind, scenes passed like a fast movie: the old woman trembling on the floor, the silent embrace, the shared rice, the carefully spread sheet. Everything had felt so pure, but now it was being spit out as a crime. Mariama tried to speak, but her throat went dry. She looked at the floor, trying to find courage in the cracks of the shiny tiles. The uniform weighed on her body, soaked in cold sweat. The scarf on her head seemed to tighten, as if trying to silence her thoughts. The housekeeper came out again, holding a cell phone. "They've already called her son. He's on his way. If she doesn't show up, you'll have to explain yourself, and you can forget about your job," she said with a look that seemed to spit fire. Mariama felt her eyes burn, but she held it in. She took a deep breath, remembering her daughter at home, the counted rice, the debts waiting at the market. She had to stay standing. She couldn't fall, not now. The doorman, who had pretended indifference before, now laughed quietly with another employee. "Those who help too much end up losing the little they have," they repeated, like a twisted proverb. Mariama leaned against the wall. Sweat ran down her neck, mixed with a chill rising up her legs. The whole hallway seemed to spin. She felt an invisible hand pushing her into a bottomless abyss. Meanwhile, the residents started coming out, curious, with glances sharp as butcher knives. Each look was a silent judgment. Mariama heard scattered phrases: theft, kidnapping. "I always suspected these cleaning women. They're facing so many silent accusations." Mariama closed her eyes. She remembered her father saying, "Silence is the loudest cry of a clean soul." She clung to that memory, like someone grabbing the last plank in a raging river. The hallway clock marked each second like a hammer to her head. Her body begged to run, but her feet were glued to the floor. In that artificially lit hallway, Mariama felt small, invisible, like a crushed insect in the corner. But even there, the flame inside her did not die. She remembered the old lady, the peace she felt when she heard that whispered prayer. The truth was a seed buried in the mud. Mariama knew that one day that seed would sprout. But in the present, the mud was thick, cold, suffocating. The echo of voices, the stairs, the weight of the soaked uniform, all joined into a cruel chorus shouting, "Guilty." But in her chest there was a silent prayer, a phrase repeating like a drumbeat: "The truth is in no hurry." When she finally took a step, her leg faltered. She held on to the wall, breathing like someone surfacing from underwater. And deep in her soul, she promised herself, "I will go home today, and I will go home with my head held high." There, in the middle of humiliation, Mariama realized she wasn't just a cleaning lady. She was a mother, a shield, a root. And even if the whole world threw stones at her, she had already made her choice. She would stand by the truth, even if it cost her the little she still had. The hallway fell silent for a moment, as if the building itself took a deep breath. But inside her, the noise was loud. It was the sound of a heart that, even wounded, never learned how to give up. The sound of the squeegee dragging across the floor echoed like an ancient lament. Mariama was on her knees, scrubbing the edges of the hallway forcefully, as if she wanted to clean not just the dirt but also the voices that accused her. Foam dripped slowly, drawing little rivers on the shiny tiles. She kept her head down. Her arms ached, but her mind was far away, stuck in that night of silence and prayer. The other cleaning ladies came and went, pushing buckets, slapping cloths on windows. But that morning, their glances were heavier than the buckets. One of them, Fatou, the chattiest one, walked behind her and threw out a phrase like spitting: "A seed. Those who help too much lose the little they have." Mariama didn't respond. Her silence was louder than any scream. She gripped the squeegee like someone holding a sword. The wet floor reflected her tired face, and for a moment, she truly saw herself, a woman marked by loss but still whole in her soul. Another co-worker, Aminata, walked by quickly, avoiding eye contact as if fleeing from a mirror. Deep down, Aminata admired Mariama, but didn't have the courage to show it. In that hallway, gossip grew faster than weeds on a riverbank. Look, at her got involved with rich folks. Now she's going to pay the price, muttered a voice from the back. Mariama didn't raise her head. The twisted cloth dripped onto the floor. Each drop felt like a swallowed sob. Aisa, the daughter, got home earlier that day. When she saw her mother, she noticed the swollen eyes, the trembling hands. She waited for the right moment, tugged at the sleeve of her uniform, and asked in a soft voice, "Mama, why did everyone turn their backs on you?" Mariama turned slowly. She looked deep into her daughter's eyes, as if planting a seed that would one day bloom. She ran her hand over her face, took a deep breath, and replied, "Because the truth isn't in a hurry. It walks at the pace of silence, but it arrives whole." The girl stood still, chewing on those words as if they were a piece of tough cassava. She understood little but felt a lot, and in that silence between mother and daughter, an invisible pact was born. Even humiliated, Mariama would not trade the truth for any temporary comfort. The next day, Mariama went back to work as if heading to a silent war. She arrived before everyone, prepared the buckets, tied her headscarf firmly. Each step was a declaration of resistance. The hallway felt longer, the air heavier. Fatu arrived late, panting, and immediately began spreading the news. "They say she be fired today. The boss already told them to prepare the papers. She won't last another day." The whisper turned into a current. The others shook their heads, some with pity, others with a sparkle in their eyes, as if feeding on her downfall. Mariama just scrubbed, until her fingers turned red. In her mind, the fragile old lady still murmured prayers from the night before, and deep down, a phrase repeated, "God sees what the world's eyes ignore." At lunch, Mariama sat alone in a corner, with a limp lunchbox of rice and watery beans. The others gathered together, speaking loudly, laughing in sharp bursts that cut like a blade. "Maybe she wanted money, huh? Or a reward," one said. Another added, "When poor people try to help, they always end up in trouble." Mary chewed slowly, staring at the horizon. Inside, each bite was an act of courage. The food went down bitter, but she didn't cry. Her tears were saved for the thin pillow at home, where only God listened. After lunch, in the locker room, she found Aminata standing at the door. Her eyes were downcast, her hands restless. When Mariama passed by, Aminata murmured almost inaudibly, "I know you didn't do anything wrong." Mariama stopped for a second, looked her in the eyes, but said nothing. She just placed a hand on her co-worker's shoulder and moved on. Sometimes, the truth doesn't need speeches. At the end of the day, while Mariama was putting away her tools, she heard the laughter and the cutting jokes again. "She thinks she's a saint with a squeegee," mocked one of the colleagues, banging the bucket on the floor. Mariama took a deep breath, folded the cloths, closed the cabinet carefully. Before leaving, she turned and looked at them all. She didn't say a word. Her silence filled the hallway like a river rising on a rainy day. She left with firm steps, each one a silent scream. "I am more than what they say." When she got home, she found Aisa sitting at the door, drawing on the ground with a stick. Seeing her mother, the girl stood up, ran, and threw herself into her arms. Mariama hugged her tightly, like someone holding onto the only root during a storm. That night, while combing her daughter's hair, Mariama thought about the looks, the whispers, the turned backs, and even tired, she felt a strength in her chest she didn't know she had. Because for someone who has already lost everything, what's left is dignity, and that no one could take away. Mariama kissed her daughter's forehead, blew out the candle in the corner of the room, and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, the fight continues, but I'll go with my head held high." Aisa fell asleep with a timid smile, and Mariama, lying on the floor, looked at the cracked ceiling and thanked in silence. In that moment, even surrounded by injustice, she understood. The greatest wealth of a woman is not the money in her pocket, but the peace on her pillow. The sun rose lazily, spreading a warm glow over the dusty streets. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the strong scent of fried food rising from the stalls, inviting passers-by to come closer. It was market day, and the whole neighborhood seemed to wake up earlier. as if, for a few hours, everyone had forgotten about late bills, aching knees, and arguments at home. Mariama left home with a tired face but firm steps. She wore the same worn-out dress, a scarf tied around her head, and carried a cloth bag full of carefully counted coins. Each coin was an effort, a floor scrubbed, a swallowed tear. She was going to the market to buy flour and maybe some leftover vegetables for soup. Aisha stayed at home, arranging the small improvised altar in the corner of the room. The girl insisted on praying for her mother, even without fully understanding how or why. To Aisha, her mother was like a tree, silent but full of strength. Mariama walked among the stalls, dodging the shouts of vendors, listening to old songs echoing from an old speaker at the end of the street. She picked each tomato carefully, as if holding a baby. She examined each cassava with the eyes of someone who couldn't afford to make a mistake. Then, as she passed by the cornmeal fritter stall, Mariama stopped. Her heart jumped, like a fish, out of water. There, sitting on an improvised bench, was the fragile old woman, the same one who had slept in her bed, slowly nibbling a fritter. Her eyes lost in the movement of the market. Mariama froze. The noise of the market suddenly disappeared. The voices went silent. The clinking of coins, the footsteps, everything dissolved. She only saw that old woman, so small, so fragile, her trembling hands holding the greasy paper. Her chest tightened. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind. Was the woman okay? Did she remember her? Was someone hurting her? But stronger than the fear came instinct, the same instinct that made her pull the woman from the cold hallway floor. Mariama stepped forward. When she got close, the old woman lifted her gaze, a gaze full of tears, longing, and stored up gratitude. The woman let the fritter fall into her lap, opened her arms, and without a word, began to cry. Mariama knelt on the dirt floor, not caring about the dust rising, not bothered by the curious stares. She held the woman's face in her hands. There, in that silent embrace, the entire world disappeared. The whole market fell silent for a few seconds. The vendors stopped stirring their pots. The children clutched their mothers' skirts. Even the fish sellers lowered their voices. No one fully understood, but everyone felt that something greater was happening there. The old woman, sobbing, clung to Mariama, as if holding a daughter returned from war. Mariama stroked her back, repeating softly, "It's okay, it's okay, I'm here, I'm here." The woman's hands were light, almost fleshless, but her grip was strong, full of an ancient strength, a longing too big to fit in her chest. After a while, Mariama helped her sit up better. She wiped the woman's tears with the hem of her own dress. She picked up the fritter from her lap and placed it on clean paper. The old woman smiled, but her smile trembled. Her eyes still shone, full of unspoken stories. "You saved me. You gave me life," the woman finally whispered. Mariama held her hand, feeling her paper-thin skin. "It was nothing, Mama. It was God who brought you to me," Mariama replied, her voice choked. People around them started to get closer. They wanted to know who that woman was, why there was so much crying, so many hugs, but no one dared interrupt. There was a silent respect, as if everyone there had been invited to witness a miracle. An older man, a seller of sugarcane candy, approached and spoke softly. When two souls recognize each other, the world stops to listen. Then he went back to his corner, shaking his head in reverence. After a while, Mariama helped the woman stand up. She held her arm firmly, like someone holding a rare plant on a windy day. Their eyes met at every step, as if sealing an invisible pact. The old woman seemed more alive next to Mariama, as if her mere presence brought color back to her skin, strength to her legs. As they walked, people stepped aside. Some bowed their heads, others let out long sighs. Mariama looked up at the sky and thanked silently. Thanked not just for finding the woman alive, but for feeling that even in life's mud, there are still encounters that wash the soul. The market, once just noise and rush, became the stage for a scene no one would forget. Even the strong smell of frying seemed less aggressive. Some said they smelled flowers in the air. Others claimed they heard a distant song. But the truth was simple. Their two women had reunited, and with them, all of humanity remembered that true love has no price. As they walked away, the woman squeezed Mariama's arm and whispered softly, my daughter, and Mariama, eyes full of tears, murmured, "You were never alone, and you never will be." With each step, the two left behind, Not only the market dust, but also the doubts, the fears, and the malicious gossip. The world would continue to be harsh. The bills would keep coming. The work would remain heavy. But in that moment, amidst the smell of fritters and the noise of voices, Mariama gained a new name, a new story, a new reason to keep going. And so, in the simplicity of the market, on the dirt floor, a bond was born stronger than blood. A bond that neither time, nor poverty, nor sharp tongues could destroy. A bond woven with tears, simple rice, and prayers whispered in the dark. A bond that would one day make the whole world bow its head in respect. The streets seemed longer that day. The sun was high, burning the skin as if it wanted to pull out secrets hidden in the blood. Mariama walked slowly, her steps heavy but steady. Beside her, the old woman walked supported on Mariama's arm, each step a struggle, each breath a challenge. The silence between them was deep, full of words that would never be spoken. Mariama didn't need to hear to understand. The old woman didn't need to speak to express her gratitude. As they approached the mansion gate, Mariama's heart beat, louder than the noise of cars and voices in the street. The iron gate was large, black, with golden details that shone in the sun. It looked like a castle, but Mariama knew that behind that facade a cold world lived. When they reached the entrance, the old woman stopped. She looked at the gate, as if facing a giant. Her breathing grew shallow, her eyes filled with tears. Mariama squeezed her arm, transmitting courage. The security guards appeared immediately. Two large men in black uniforms crossed their arms, their gazes hard. One of them pointed a finger at Mariama, his voice deep. "What do you think you're doing? Step back." Mariama didn't move. She stood still, holding the old woman firmly. The other guards started laughing, a cold, mocking laugh. "She came back to finish the job, huh? Wanted to steal again," he said, shaking his head. Mariama's face burned with shame and anger, but she didn't let go of the old woman. She didn't scream, didn't explain, she just held on. The old woman, meanwhile, began to tremble. Her fragile body wavered, her knees buckled. Mariama wrapped her arm around her, supporting her. From inside, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed. The gate opened slowly, as if about to swallow them both. Then, a tall man appeared, light-skinned, hair slicked back, wearing a suit so expensive it could feed an entire village. The son, the boss. His eyes were wide, red with fury. When he saw his mother leaning on Mariama, his face changed. A mix of shock and anger took over. He stepped forward, stopping just a few steps away. His voice thundered. "Let her go now. Who do you think you are? Are you kidnapping my mother? Leave before I call the police." The shout echoed through the gate, scaring even the birds on the wall. Mariama lowered her eyes but didn't release the old woman. Silence spread. The old woman slowly lifted her head, looked at her son. Tears streamed down, soaking the scarf around her neck. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. The son looked from Mariama to his mother, his face twisting more and more. "Let her go. Now I knew you were a leech." He spat, each word harsher than the last. Mariama didn't respond. She squeezed the old woman's frail hand. That touch was stronger than any word. The son stepped forward again but stopped when he saw his mother tighten her grip on Mariama's hand. For a second, the air seemed to freeze. Neighbors began gathering outside. Some crowded behind the gate, others watched from balconies. The murmuring grew. Curiosity outweighed fear. "It's her, the cleaning lady," they whispered, caught red-handed. Mariama felt sweat running down her back. Her body trembled, but her spirit did not. The old woman finally found strength and murmured something, almost inaudible. Mariama leaned in to hear. "Don't let go. Stay with me," the old woman whispered, her voice broken. The son paused. For a moment, his expression softened, but it quickly hardened again. He raised his hand, signaling the guards. "Get this woman out of here now," he ordered. The guards advanced. Mariama closed her eyes, embraced the old woman tightly. In that embrace, she seemed to say, "If I'm to be dragged, so be it, but I won't let go." One guard grabbed Mariama's arm, trying to pull her away. The other tried to separate the old woman. The old woman's scream echoed, weak but piercing. "No, don't touch her." The son hesitated. For a second, the guards froze. The sound of the gate slamming echoed like thunder. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Mariama opened her eyes slowly. She looked at the son, then at the old woman. In her eyes, a silent plea. That look said more than any speech. See me, hear me, feel me. The son took a deep breath, lowered his hand, but his face stayed hard. You're fired. Never set foot here again. Get away from my house. His voice was cold, cutting, like a butcher's knife. Mariama, her heart in pieces, slowly let go of the old woman. She looked at her one last time, eyes brimming with tears. She ran her hand over her face, adjusted her scarf. The old woman wept in silence, her body swaying like a leaf in the wind. Mariama stepped back. The son turned his back, pushing his mother inside, as if shoving a burden. The gate began to close, creaking like a wound forced shut. As she walked away, Mariama felt her legs heavy as stone, but inside, the flame still burned. Because even pushed away, humiliated, she knew she had done the right thing. She walked down the dusty street, hearing the voices behind. Serves her right. She got involved with rich folks. Now she'll go begging. With every step, Mariama clutched her chest, repeating to herself, I don't regret it. I don't regret it. And deep in her heart, she felt certain that the story didn't end there. The street seemed endless, but Mariama kept going, because those who carry the truth in their chest do not bow under the weight of closed doors. And even if the world kicked her, she would keep going with the dignity of someone who chose to love without expecting applause. The next day dawned heavy, as if the sky also carried Mariama's burden. Aisha woke up first and found her mother sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, holding her uniform soaked with tears. The scarf that always covered her head was tossed aside, revealing the white strands Mariama hid from the world. Aisha stood frozen in the doorway, hugging herself, too afraid to speak. The silence that morning was so dense it seemed even the air was scared to move. Mariama raised her red swollen eyes and forced a smile for her daughter. It's going to be okay, my flower, she said, but her voice came out low, broken, as if each word were a stone stuck in her throat. Aisha slowly approached, knelt beside her mother, and rested her head on her shoulder. They stayed there, quiet, breathing the same painful air, feeling the same fear, sharing the same shame that did not belong to them. When the clock marked the hour, Mariama got up. She washed her face with cold water from the bucket, tied the scarf again, put on the uniform. With each movement, it was as if she was stacking up courage. The uniform, once a symbol of dignity, now weighed like a chain. She walked to the building with slow steps. Her legs trembled, but her chest carried a firmness that only someone betrayed so many times can hold. She reached the gate and found the usual doorman, his sharp eyes holding a folded paper in his hand. You don't need to go up today. The boss sent this, the man said, stretching out the paper with a hint of sarcasm. Mariama took it, opened it slowly. The words danced before her eyes, blurred by tears that insisted on being born. It was the official notice of dismissal. No explanation, only the cold phrase, terminated for breach of trust. The doorman crossed his arms, leaned on the post, and let out a short laugh. Serves you right. Who told you to get involved where you weren't called? He murmured. Mariama didn't reply. She folded the paper, put it in her pocket, and looked at the sky. The cleaning colleagues began arriving. One passed quickly, avoiding her gaze. Another looked her up and down, gripping the bucket tightly, as if holding an invisible shield. The hallway, once full of sounds, now felt like a cemetery of voices. Fatu, the chattiest one, approached with short steps, lips pressed tight. I told you. I said those who help too much end up losing everything, she said, trying to hide her fear behind her sharp tongue. Mariama only looked at her, a look that carried more than any words ever could. She turned around and started, walking back home. The uniform clung to her body, soaked not just with sweat but with memories that now weighed like stones. With each step, she heard whispers from the windows, voices talking about her as if she were a ghost. Serves her right. Now she cleaned the streets. The saint has fallen. At the gate of her house, Aisha was already waiting. When she saw her mother approaching, she ran to her, hugging her tightly. Mariama held her, trying to smile, but the tears fell like rain on an old roof. Are you okay, Mama? Aisha asked, her voice trembling. Mariama took a deep breath, ran her hand over her daughter's face, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Mama is alive, my love, and whoever is alive can still fight, she replied, even knowing that the fight would now be much harder. That night, Mariama washed her uniform and hung it on the line. She stood there, watching the fabric sway in the wind, like a white flag of surrender. But in her heart, there was no surrender. There was heavy silence. Yes, there was shame, pain, humiliation. But there was also a flame, small, timid, but alive. She sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, and pulled Aissa into her lap. She started singing an old lullaby, the one her own mother used to sing when the night felt too big. Aissa fell asleep on her lap, clutching her chest, as if seeking shelter from all the world's cruelty. Mariama stayed there, looking at the ceiling, remembering every corner of the building, every stair she scrubbed, every muffled laugh behind luxurious doors. In each memory, a wound, but also, in each wound, a seed of resistance. Outside, the neighborhood still murmured. The neighbors, sitting on their balconies, spoke loudly, almost as if they wanted Mariama to hear. She thought she was better than us. Now she's paying for it. Who told her to try to show off? That's what happens when you want to play the hero. But Mariama on that cold floor no longer heard anything. The only sound that filled her mind was Aissa's calm breathing, the only reason that kept her standing. The night wind came through the open window, messing up their hair. Mariama looked outside, at the shyly shining moon, and silently murmured, "I hope you're okay, wherever you are. That's all that matters." That dawn Mariama slept with her body exhausted, but her spirit alight. She knew the battle didn't end there. She knew humiliation was only a curve on the path, and even dismissed, rejected, spat on by sharp tongues, she felt she still carried the one thing no one could steal, her dignity. In the silence of the room, in the lap of a mother who had lost her job but not her soul, was born the courage of someone who already understood that true wealth is not measured by money or titles, but by the strength to keep standing when the whole world expects you to fall. The next morning Mariama woke up before the sun. Her body felt heavy, as if she had carried sacks of stones all night. She got up slowly, her bones protesting with every movement. The room was still dark, but she knew every inch of that floor. She didn't need light to find the small improvised altar in the corner. On an old little table sat a candle, a chipped painting of Our Lady, and a glass of water. There, Mariama spoke with God, but without shouts, without grand requests. It was a corner for silent confession, for whispered gratitude. Aissa was still asleep, wrapped in the thin sheet. Her face looked calm, but in her dreams, she might already be carrying the world's fears. Mariama looked at her daughter and felt her heart tighten, as if someone was squeezing a fist inside her chest. With trembling hands, she lit the candle. The flame flickered, illuminating her tired face. She sat on the floor, crossed her legs, and closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. But in truth, no words came, only images. The old woman holding her hand, her son yelling at the gate, the uniform soaked with tears, her daughter asking, "Why did everyone turn their back on you?" The candle wavered with the gentle wind coming through the window crack. Mariama began to pray in silence. She didn't ask for a new job. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for revenge. She only asked God to care for the old woman. She asked for strength to keep walking, even when her legs wouldn't obey. She asked that her daughter never lose her sweetness, even if the world spit bitterness at her. As she prayed, a tear fell into her lap, then another, and another, until they formed a small river running down her thin knees. The floor seemed to absorb each drop, like thirsty earth waiting for rain. Aissa woke up slowly, saw her mother there, silent, holding the candles, flame as if holding a secret. She stood still at the door, too afraid to interrupt. Then she understood, even without words, that prayer isn't just speaking to God, but also learning to listen to the silence. After a while, Mariama opened her eyes. Her face looked calmer, as if, among the tears, she had washed not only the pain but also the fear. The candle's flame trembled, reflecting in her eyes a soft, almost childlike glow. Aissa approached, sat beside her mother, and rested her head on her shoulder. There was no conversation, no explanation. In that silence, there was a soul pact. Mariama ran her hand through her daughter's hair, breathing deeply, feeling each strand as a thread of hope. The wind entered through the window, stronger this time, and blew out the candle. Mariama looked at the smoking wick, but didn't get up to relight it. She stayed there, firm, as if understanding that the true light doesn't live in wax, but in the heart. Outside, the neighborhood woke up. The neighbors swept their sidewalks, Street vendors arranged their stalls, radios started spreading news, and sad songs. Mariama listened to it all as a distant echo. Inside her, there was a greater silence, a silence that spoke louder than any gossip. That day, there was no pot on the stove, no rice to separate, no uniform to iron. There was only emptiness, an emptiness that could swallow any weak soul. But Mariama wasn't weak. She stood up slowly, helped Aisha stand, and together they cleaned the house. Every sweep of the broom felt like a silent prayer. Every dish washed a confession. Every folded piece of clothing, a plea for mercy. The day passed slowly, as if the clock were too lazy to move. At night, Mariama sat in the corner again. This time, without a candle, without a glass of water. She closed her eyes, held her daughter's hand, and simply stayed in silence. Deep down, a small voice inside her repeated, "I hope she's okay. That's all that matters." Aisha, looking at her mother, learned then the difference between praying and living in prayer. She learned that dignity is silent, that true love doesn't make noise, doesn't ask for an audience. When the moon appeared in the sky, lighting up the tin roof, Mariama looked up. Her tired face seemed lighter. Even without a job, without money, without the neighborhood's approval, there was something no one could take. The peace of someone who knows they did the right thing. And that night, while the rest of the world slept, Mariama felt she was not alone. In the silence, she found the truest company anyone can have, a clean conscience resting beside her faith. At the mansion, the days dragged on like a river without a current. The house, filled with expensive furniture, imported rugs, and chandeliers that shone like stars, was steeped in an uncomfortable silence. The son, used to commanding and being obeyed, paced back and forth, his expression heavy. His mother, the fragile old woman Mariama had rescued, now spent her days sitting on the porch, staring at the gate as if waiting for someone who would never come. Her face was paler, her trembling hands held an old rosary, and her eyes carried a shine the sun couldn't decipher. One morning, during breakfast served in a delicate porcelain cup, the son looked at his mother and asked impatiently, "Why do you insist on sitting out there? You need to rest." His voice was dry, harsh, filled with an authority that only knew commands and figures. The old woman slowly lifted her eyes. It was as if she looked through him, searching for a man who no longer existed there. She took a deep breath, gripped the rosary tighter, and replied, in a weak but firm voice, "I'm waiting for someone who gave me what you never knew how to give." The son frowned, confused. He tried to insist, "That woman, that cleaning lady, she only wanted to take advantage of you. Don't you see? She wanted money, she wanted fame." The old woman shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. With a sigh that seemed to come from deep inside, she said, "She bathed me, gave me rice, listened to me. Things you never did." The son fell silent. The cup in his hand trembled, a few drops of coffee staining the immaculate saucer. He tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. The old woman continued, now looking directly into his eyes. "She cared for me as if I were her family. You only remember me when you need to show others you're a good son." With each sentence, the son seemed to shrink. The big man, owner of companies, respected in meetings, now looked like a little boy in front of his mother. A boy who never knew how to listen, who never knew how to look beyond his own interests. "She called me mother, and I called her daughter. Have you ever called me that?" she asked, a solitary tear running down her cheek. The son lowered his head. The ground seemed to pull him downward. The distant noise of cars passing in the street sounded like judgment. The old woman brought her hand to his face, gently, even weak. There was a deep affection there, a final effort to touch her son's hardened soul. "I didn't need more jewelry, more dresses. I needed to be heard, to be embraced, to have warm rice on my plate. She gave me all of that, without asking for anything in return." The son held her hand, now wet with tears. Words started to form, but they came out ragged. I didn't know. I thought that." The old woman interrupted with a slight shake of her head. "You didn't want to know. You preferred to believe what was easier. You chose pride over truth." The son cried uncontrollably. His tears were heavy, the kind that carry years of swallowed truths. His once handsome face was now stained. His shoulders shook. The old woman, even fragile, seemed larger than the entire mansion. The expensive furniture, the rugs, the paintings, all seemed small next to the gentle strength of that woman. She pulled his face closer and whispered, Life teaches with patience. What isn't learned with love is taught through pain. And you will understand, my son. You will understand, even if it's too late. He rested his forehead on her lap, sobbing like a child. In that moment, all the arrogance, all the power, all the money evaporated. Only a man remained, stripped of all masks, in front of the mother he had always ignored. On the porch, the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink. A bird perched on the wall seemed to accompany the sun's restrained sobs. The world around them carried on, but there, in that small space, two souls finally met after years of silence. The old woman ran her fingers through his hair, murmuring words only they could hear. Words that seemed to soothe but also poke old wounds. The son gripped her rosary, as if clinging to a plank in a raging sea. In the distance, the mansion gate remained closed, but in the son's heart, a door finally opened. A door that Mariama, with her silence and simple rice, had begun to unlock. When the son lifted his face, his eyes were different. There was a new glow, a shame that burned, but also a desire to start over. The old woman smiled, a weak but true smile. In that moment, without needing grand speeches, the truth emerged. A truth that Mariama had carried alone, that the entire neighborhood had trampled on, but that now appeared clear as morning light. And even far away, Mariama, in her humble home, felt a warmth in her chest. Without knowing exactly what was happening, but with an uneasy soul, she looked at the sky and murmured, "The truth is never in a hurry, it always arrives." At the mansion, the son stayed beside his mother until the sun disappeared. For the first time in a long time, he didn't think about profits, meetings, or others' approval. He thought only of his mother, that fragile woman he had almost lost forever. And in the silence that remained after the tears, a seed was born. A seed that only germinates in the soil of humility, watered by pain, but also by the courage of those who finally choose to see. The sun was already starting to set in the sky when Mariama adjusted the small makeshift stall on the sidewalk. The faded fabric swayed in the wind, and the trays of pastries rested on an old wooden table supported by bricks. It was all she had managed to set up with the few coins left after her dismissal. Aissa helped her mother, running back and forth, bringing water, straightening napkins. The girl's smile was small but true. For her, every customer who approached was a victory. A piece of bread, a new notebook for school. Mariama watched her daughter's every move, her eyes full of care and pride. Her face was thinner, her hands calloused, but her gaze carried a steady light, like a lantern that insists on shining even as the wind tries to snuff it out. The first customers arrived shyly, drawn by the warm smell of pasties and coxonas. Some knew her story, whispered as they paid, cast curious glances, but Mariama responded with silence and a slight nod of her head. The afternoon slowly faded, painting the asphalt with an orange hue. Mariama wiped the sweat from her forehead with her dress sleeve, while Aissa counted the coins in the small box. It was then that she suddenly felt a shiver crawl up her back. She lifted her eyes and saw, across the street, a man standing still. He wore a light shirt, neatly pressed linen pants, and shoes so clean they reflected the sunlight. It was him, the old woman's son, the same man who had humiliated her, called her an opportunist, who had torn her dignity apart in public. Mariama felt her heart beat faster, like a drum at a festival. The customers kept coming, but for a few seconds she heard nothing but her own blood pounding in her ears. The man took a step, then another. He walked slowly, as if his legs no longer obeyed. His face carried a different weight. His eyes no longer had that arrogant shine. They seemed to search for something he had never seen before. When he reached the stall, Mariama looked away. She picked up a pastel, handed it to a customer, pretended to straighten the napkins. She didn't want to face him. She didn't need more words, more wounds. But he didn't leave. He stood there, arms hanging at his sides. Aissa noticed the tension. She grabbed her mother's arm, looking at the man with suspicion, like a small lioness guarding the older female. The man tried to speak. He opened his mouth, but the words refused to come. He took a deep breath, lowered his eyes to the ground. It was in that simple gesture that something changed. For the first time, he seemed small, fragile, human. Marie remained steady, her face turned toward the food tray. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her movements calm. She handed another pastel to a customer, offered a slight smile, thanked for the change. The man took another deep breath, lifted his tear-filled eyes, and murmured, his voice torn, I didn't know. I didn't see. Mariama didn't respond. She kept moving the pastries, counting coins, arranging the box. Each movement was a wall between them. He tried to step closer, but Aissa stepped in front. Small, but with her chest puffed out in courage. The man stopped, respecting the silence. For a few seconds, the noise of the street seemed to stop. The wind slowed, the cars moved more slowly. A dog barked in the distance, but the sound felt muffled. Mariama finally lifted her eyes, but did not look directly at him. Her gaze passed over the horizon, as if looking for a fixed point to hold on to. In that moment, the man lowered his head. His shoulders slumped. His hands came together, as if holding an invisible pain. The silence was so deep it almost hurt. Mariama felt her breath heavy in her chest. Her whole past unfolded there before her. The cold hallway, the trembling old woman, the shared rice, the carefully arranged sheet, the closing gate, the shouts, the dismissal, everything pulsed like an open wound. But she didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't ask for explanations. She simply stayed there, holding the silence like someone carrying a potful to the brim on a festive day. The man took one last deep breath, stepped back, and turned slowly. He walked away, dragging his feet, as if each step were a silent confession. Aissa gripped her mother's hand tightly. Mariama looked at her daughter and, in a gentle gesture, squeezed her small fingers, saying without words, "We're together." The street noise slowly returned, the sound of horns, conversations, the vendor shouting from the corner. Mariama went back to work, a bead of sweat rolling down her forehead. She picked up another pastel, smiled at a customer, received the change. Inside, her heart beat in silence, a silence that said everything she needed to hear. Those who plant truth, even in the mud, one day will see a flower. And that late afternoon, as the sun disappeared behind the buildings and the shadows stretched along the sidewalk, Mariama remained there, steady, selling her pastries, because those who learn to live with little also learn that dignity doesn't fit inside late apologies. She carried on, head held high, soul whole. And beside her, Aissa learned that the greatest inheritance a mother can leave isn't money, nor fine clothes, but the courage to never bow her head. The sun was already saying goodbye on the horizon when Mariama gathered the last pasties. Aissa, tired, helped stack the empty boxes. The lights in the houses were beginning to turn on. The smell of burning firewood spread through the street, and the day ended with that silence that only exists when the body is exhausted but the soul remains on guard. Mariama looked carefully at each coin in the little box. It wasn't much, but it was enough to ensure rice and maybe some beans for the next day. Her face carried a deep weariness, but also a serenity few people knew. Aissa sighed, fidgeting with the cloth covering the pastries. The girl's curious gaze scanned the street, as if searching for something or someone. It was then, in a moment that felt plucked from a dream, that a different sound cut through the air. Across the street, a strange movement began. People came, out of their houses, left pots on the stove, abandoned laundry on the line. A man was walking, slowly, his shoulders slumped, hands joined in front of him. It was him, the old woman's son, the man who, some time ago, had pushed Mariama out of the mansion with words sharper than a knife. But this time, he came without security guards, without a suit, without the aura of power. He wore a simple shirt, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. With each step he took, the whole neighborhood turned into an audience. The neighbor women, always hungry for gossip, crowded at their gates. Children stopped playing soccer, dogs barked and ran around. Men dropped their domino pieces to get a better look. When he reached the front of the stall, he stopped. Silence spread like spilled water. Mariama, head down, continued organizing the boxes, pretending not to notice. But her heart pounded so loudly it felt like it echoed on the sidewalk. Aissa clutched her mother's arm tightly. Her eyes trembled, as if they already anticipated what was about to happen. The man took a deep breath and knelt before Mariama. The gesture made more noise than any shout. The entire neighborhood held its breath. He bowed his head and placed his hands at her feet. The dust from the street stained his light-colored pants. His knees scraped the ground, but he didn't care. His voice came out low, full of shame and pain. "Forgive me. I didn't see who you were. I didn't understand. I judged you, humiliated you, took away your bread. But you You saved the only person I had left in this world." His words spread through the street like a strong wind. Some women began to cry in silence. An old man took off his hat, bowed his head in respect. Mariama stood still. Her gaze lost itself on the horizon, as if she wanted to escape. Aissa trembled, her eyes wide, holding her mother's hand so tightly it hurt. The man continued, now crying openly. "I was blind. I was arrogant. You cared for my mother when I didn't even have the courage to look at her. You were a daughter to her when I was nothing but a cold name." He pressed his hands to Mariama's feet, dirtying them in the dust, staining his cuffs with dirt. He was a broken man, stripped of pride, asking forgiveness not only from Mariama, but from himself, from the neighborhood, from life itself. Marie lowered her eyes, took a deep breath. Her chest rose and fell as if carrying an entire river inside. Finally, she spoke. Her voice came out firm but full of tenderness. "Now she's well. That's all that matters." The silence shattered. It was as if a wave had swept through the street. The neighbor women cried. Some hugged each other. Men wiped their eyes in secret. The neighborhood, so used to judging, now learned to stay silent. The man remained on his knees for a few more seconds, then placed his forehead on the ground in total surrender. When he stood up, his face was covered in dust. His hands trembled, his knees stained. Mariama turned to Aissa, ran her hand over her daughter's face, and pulled her close. She held the girl like holding a piece of her own heart. The man, still sobbing, took a few steps back. He looked at Mariama one last time, as if looking at an altar. Then, he turned slowly and walked away, dragging his feet, as if carrying an invisible punishment. The neighborhood fell silent. The only sound was the quiet sobs of a few women. Mariama went back to organizing the boxes, as if nothing had happened. Aissa helped her, now with eyes shining with a silent pride. In the sky, the first stars timidly appeared. Mariama looked up, took a deep breath. Deep in her soul, she felt a gentle relief, a warmth that couldn't be bought at any market. There, on that dusty street, Mariama proved she didn't need applause or clapping. The greatest recognition was in the peace of her pillow, in her head held high, in the steady hand holding her daughter's. And that night, while the neighborhood retreated in silence, each person carried home a new story to tell. But, above all, they carried a silent lesson. Truth can be humiliated, spit on, buried, but one day it returns, on its knees, asking for forgiveness. Mariama, without needing to say anything else, showed that greatness isn't measured in money or fame, but in the strength to stay dignified when everything and everyone wants to see you on your knees. The next morning, Mariama woke up before the first crow of the rooster. The sky was still a dark veil, sprinkled with shy stars, but in her heart, a new light was already shining. She got up slowly, feeling every bone crack like dry bamboo. She ran her hand over her face, took a deep breath, and looked at Aissa still curled up in the corner of the thin mattress. Her daughter seemed to be dreaming of something good, because she slept with a slight smile, a smile Mariama hadn't seen in a long time. The mother spent a few minutes watching the girl, like someone admiring a fragile little plant insisting on growing by the roadside. That day, she didn't put on her faded blue uniform. Instead, she grabbed the old apron, tied it around her waist, and began preparing the pastry dough. The flour spread through the air, stuck to her hair and arms, but Mariama worked with an almost sacred lightness. When the sun appeared, painting the rooftops orange, she already had the stall set up. Aissa helped energetically, arranging napkins, cleaning the makeshift tables. The girl's smile was so big, it seemed to light up the whole street. Soon after, something unexpected happened. The old woman, the boss's mother, appeared, slowly walking down the street, supported by a polished wooden cane. She was accompanied by a younger woman carrying a basket of fresh flowers. Her steps were slow but firm, like someone who no longer fears anything. When she reached the stall, Mariama stopped. Silence took over the space. The people around held their breath. The old woman opened the basket, took out a bouquet of white flowers, and handed it to Mariama, saying in a weak but full of life voice, "Now I know where kindness lives. I came to visit my daughter." Mariama held the flowers carefully, as if receiving a child in her arms. Aissa ran over, hugged the old woman round the legs, and the three of them stayed there, in an embrace that said more than any words could. From that day on, the old woman began to visit the stall whenever she could. She would sit in a simple chair, listen to Mariama tell stories, watch Aisha play. Sometimes she brought flowers, other times only a silence full of gratitude. The neighborhood, which once spit venom, now looked at Mariama with respect. The neighbor women who used to whisper at their windows now greeted her on the street. Some even asked for advice, took pastries home, offered help. With each visit from the old woman, respect spread like the smell of fresh coffee. Mariama didn't want to return to the mansion, even when the son insisted, offering money, comfort, and a position as housekeeper. She calmly refused, her gaze steady, her hands holding the apron as if holding her own soul. "I've already found my place," she simply said. At the stall, Mariama found more than sustenance. She found dignity, community, a freedom no big house could ever offer. And above all, she found the chance to teach Aisha the greatest lesson of all. Strength doesn't live in tall walls or soft carpets, but in a heart that knows how to remain pure even when trampled. Aisha, inspired by her mother's courage, decided to study to become a nurse. She wanted to care for people, just like her mother cared for the old woman. She spent hours reading borrowed notebooks, scribbling dreams in the dirt floor. Mariama's pride overflowed in her eyes, shining brighter than any jewel. At the end of one afternoon, while handing a pastry to a customer, Mariama looked up at the sky, now painted gold and lilac. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath. In a whisper that only the wind heard, she murmured, "Thank you for giving me courage greater than shame." There, in that instant, there was no music, no speech, only her soul, whole, at peace. The customer took the pastry, smiled, and went on his way. Mariama returned to the counter, adjusted the pastries, and smiled at Aisha, who was washing her hands in a bucket beside her. In that smile, the whole story fit. The pain, the shame, the humiliation, the dismissal, the silence, the prayer, the reclaimed dignity, the forgiveness received, the new life built. On the dusty street, the world carried on. Cars passed, children ran, neighbors gossiped. But in the small space of the pastry stall, there existed an entire universe, a universe of love, of strength, of faith. And so, Mariama carried on, head held high, soul clean, hands steady, because those who are roots do not bend to the wind. Those who are truth are not lost to time. And in the heart of those who watched from afar, the lesson was engraved. Not in stone, but in living memory. A simple woman can carry more royalty in her chest than any shining crown. In the final scene, the camera slowly pulls back, showing Mariama smiling, Aisha by her side. The old woman at the gate, the flowers, swaying in the wind, and in the background, the sky, silent, as if confirming, justice always arrives, even if it takes time.